All right, so today I wanted to make a quick video about this tweet that I made the other day. Again, taking advice from the wrong people is one of the biggest mistakes average people make. And this is something that, again, I've noticed a lot personally. And I think that this is something that the more you know, the more you realize, right? And I wouldn't say I'm necessarily an expert, right? But this is my opinion on the topic. And you can give example after example of this. And I mean, the first example would be financial advice, right? The amount of bad advice you hear is staggering. And even from people that are supposed to be people that know. How many of these traditional finance people do you know that still are bearish on Bitcoin? How many of these traditional finance people out there still recommend the same garbage they've been recommending for 20, 30 years, 40 years? The exact same stuff. Look at diet, right? I mean, as someone who's in very good shape, the amount of absolute garbage you hear all the time is staggering. And a lot of this stuff is from quote-unquote experts. Again, you see all these doctors and stuff on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, whatever, that give just garbage advice. And when it comes to diet, a lot of the bad advice is people giving advice that might work for them or a particular group of people, but might not work for other people. When it comes to diet, one of the quick things you realize is what works for one person might not work for another person. Now, again, there is 100%, doesn't matter who it is, kinds of things, as in, if you want to lose weight, you need to eat less than your body requires to maintain your weight. And obviously vice versa is true. If you want to build muscle, you're going to need 0.8 probably is the minimum. 1 gram is the traditional advice per pound of body weight in protein, right? You're going to want to get your quality carbs and your quality fats. Like, again, like that advice is, now again, there's the keto debate, there's the, like, all that stuff starts to come into play, but the main things I think stand true. When it comes to finance, one of the worst pieces of advice that's given out nowadays is you got to go to college, right? You got to go to college. Over Christmas, with one of the family get-togethers, this was one of the things that came up. And again, surely enough, you know, the older people are, the more they value a degree. That's pretty much the tried and true situation. And the big argument that they always get is, oh, well, you know, even if the degree isn't directly related to what the job you get, it still proves that you can, you know, defer gratification and put in the work and all that kind of stuff that you hear. But that's a terrible argument, because what you're saying is that, okay, well, the best way that we can simply determine if people can defer gratification or not is to make them spend 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of their life and $50, $100, $200,000. Like, if you ask these people, if I said I'll pay you $1 million to come up with a way to determine if people can simply defer gratification that's better than a degree, right? In that it's more timely efficient and then you can do it quicker, or it's cheaper and then it doesn't cost as much. The vast majority of people could do that probably in a weekend, let alone if you gave them an extended period of time, right? So the idea that a degree is a good investment, again, for a lot of people it is. But I would probably argue the majority of the degrees out there, it's not, right? The engineering ones, a lot of the science ones, if you want to be a doctor, lawyer, yeah, those are worth it. But your general arts degrees, like, no, they're not. And one of the big reasons when it comes to degrees as well is that there's just a lot of people out there that still think that, but you need a degree. You just need a degree. And eventually that's going to go away, right? So that's just another point I'm making here. Another bad piece of advice that people get is advice on relationships. I mean, the amount of absolutely horrible advice you hear on dating and stuff, and again, I'm not going to get into that because people get all up in arms, but a lot of it is just terrible, right? A lot of it is just absolutely terrible. And typically it's because it's almost always rooted in insecureness, I guess, for lack of a better word, in that people just don't want to admit mistakes, right? In that, I mean, I'll give you a simple one here that I don't think people will find controversial. People that don't admit past mistakes, like as a guy, this is one of the most obvious red flags that you'll see. If people had a bad past relationship, and the same thing goes in vice versa, but I've never seen it the other direction, so I'm just going on experience here, right? If people don't admit past mistakes, that is an obvious red flag. Because if they make excuses for their mistakes, they're telling you that they fall into one of two categories. Either there's someone who never will take responsibility for anything they do wrong, in which case you should run from them, or they're too incompetent to notice how wrong they are, and their levels of intelligence are probably extremely lacking, in which case you should run from them. So again, this is just a easy red flag, right? Do they admit mistakes, right? Because last time I checked, the vast majority of relationships people voluntarily get into. And if you voluntarily got into a relationship, that means that you should take responsibility for dating the crazy person. Did you ask them about their past? This is one of the easiest things. People that come from abusive families, that's a massive red flag, especially if they don't acknowledge it and they haven't dealt with that. That's an easy right way of avoiding a potential very dangerous situation, right? So again, those are some examples. Again, finance. Again, Bitcoin. Again, a prime example of this. How many of these guys and girls have said they've been bearish Bitcoin for 5 years, 10 years? I mean, Bitcoin's up like 1,100% in the last 5 years. It's up probably 10,000 in the last 10 years. You've missed easily the best. I mean, people say, what about Nvidia? But again, you get my point. If you've missed arguably the best investing opportunity of your lifetime and you refuse to acknowledge you're wrong about that, why would you take advice from that person? If people are still advising, hey, put your money in whatever. If people are still advising just blindly invest 60-40 stocks to bonds, I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. In fact, as someone who has literally no experience whatsoever in the industry, just like doing research on my own, I would be more confident in my ability to manage people's money than someone who does that. I mean, you look at a lot of these. I talk to people, not a lot, but enough that it's concerning that they say, hey, well, I just give my money to the bank, and this is the worst thing too, because I've seen this before too, is that they'll simply have like one of the big Canadian banks, I won't name them, but I know people that have done this, and it's just so cringy, is that you simply say, are you conservative, moderate, or aggressive? And they literally all they do is just say, hey, we're just going to simply allocate, if you're conservative, they would say, let's say, I don't know, 30 or 40% in stocks, which is just their stock market mutual fund, and the bond part is simply their aggregate bond fund, which the stock market mutual fund, they're charging 150, 200 basis points. The bond fund, they're probably charging, I don't know, 50, 100. You're losing. If you want to put it into perspective here, if you simply invest in a total stock market ETF and pay 10 basis points versus 150 for the mutual fund, okay, that's got to be at least $100,000 over a lifetime if you're investing consistently. Probably 200 if you're very consistent, maybe even more. And this is my question for people: why are you taking advice? Why are you doing this? If I paid you $200,000 to figure out how to invest on your own, is anybody not going to do that? Okay, if you're like someone who has a net worth in the tens of millions or hundreds of millions, okay, yeah, you're gonna. But then you get into the private equity and the real high end professionals, right? If I could get one of those people, yeah, I probably would give them my money, but it's probably not going to happen. And if it does, it's not going to be anytime soon. So again, my whole point here is, I think that becoming an expert in everything is very hard, in my opinion. Right? I mean, I've been working out and trying to eat healthy for almost 10 years now, and I still know, not compared to the average person, quite a bit, but compared to an expert, not a whole lot, hardly anything about nutrition. Right? Compared to a professional, bodybuilding coach, I know very little bit about developing a workout plan and all that. I mean, I could do it for a newbie very effectively, but for a professional, not a chance in hell. So the best thing, in my opinion, to get really good at is to simply figure out the kinds of people that know what they're talking about. Because, like I said, in any industry, there's people that can have wildly different opinions that are quote-unquote experts. There are no shortage of quote-unquote experts that say, Bitcoin, it's going to $1 million this halving cycle. And then there's still the people like Peter Schiff that are quote-unquote experts. They've been managing money for decades that still say, it's going to zero, it's going to zero. Right? There are professional, there are nutritionists that swear by keto. And then there's people that are the exact opposite. There are people that swear by fasting, and then the exact opposite. So, in my opinion, number one, you got to try different things sometimes too. A lot of times, your biggest successes in life come simply from trial and error, right? Simply from trial and error. You figure out the exercises that work best for you by trying different things. You figure out the diet that works best for you from trying different things. And I think same goes for finance too. I mean, my opinion on it is you be as aggressive as you possibly can, and then you make your mistakes from there. Right? You make your mistakes from there. Another piece of advice that I would give is, especially when you're younger, you want to make as many mistakes as you possibly can. Now, again, you want to do it in a controlled environment. You want to, I'm just going to go try meth, right? Just to try it out. I'm talking about, in smarter ways, right? Investing. You want to make cold, calculated risks, and when you make the mistake, you adjust from there. Right? Invest in the tech stock if it's Nvidia, right? I'm not saying giving advice to do that, right? I'm just giving an example, right? If it blows up in your face, okay, you learn a lesson. If it works out, it works out. And my last thing that I would bring up here is another very good barometer on taking advice from people is, I don't think it's necessarily wrong. I would set your net very, very broad and very wide when you first start, right? If you're getting into finance, right? When I first got in, I set it very, very wide. I listened to Peter Schiff. I listened to basically everybody on the spectrum. But then I adjusted from there, in that an easy way to tell if you should listen to someone or not, like I said, when it comes to relationships, is do they admit they're wrong about things? And when you take the Peter Schiff example, he just refuses to admit he's wrong about Bitcoin. So again, I refuse to listen to him on anything now, even though he's actually very knowledgeable about a lot of things. But when you have that massive elephant in the room, like if you were taking advice from some big, massive real estate guru, and this guru has been bearish on beachfront Florida or California real estate for 40 years, right, going back to the 70s or the 80s, and yet he still is like, oh, yep, the crash is coming any day now, like Peter Schiff with Bitcoin. No one in the right mind is taking advice from that person. So my whole point here is that simply once you listen to people for long enough, you're going to find out very quickly. This is what they were saying a year or two about this asset that actually turned out to be very good, which builds trust, which builds credibility. Now, again, if they were saying that asset X is going to crash any time now, and they've been saying the same thing for years, you probably should stop listening to them. So it's simply a credibility game, in my opinion, when it comes to advice. And the best thing you can do, in my opinion, is get very good at figuring out who can figure things out ahead of time. Like my goal, and I can actually do this a lot of times now, right? When I see someone giving advice on Instagram or TikTok about diet stuff, I can tell pretty quickly, like probably within even like a 30-second clip, whether this person knows what they're talking about or not. Like I can tell with a pretty good degree of accuracy. And it's simply the way they're talking, the authority they give off, and all that kind of stuff. And again, you also want to quickly figure out, is this person just projecting their own experience? Because that's another thing you get a lot too. Like a lot of people, the whole, they lost money in real estate in 2008, therefore real estate's a terrible investment. They invested in some scammy crypto and they lost money on it, therefore you should never invest in any crypto, including Bitcoin. Like people like that. Like that's another obvious red flag. So again, obviously, the idea of getting good at figuring out who knows what they're talking about right away, that is definitely subjective, and you're not always going to be right. But it's something that you have to get very good at. Same goes for stocks, too. Like when you have people, I mean, crypto is a good example of this, too. And when you have people that promoted stocks, like this happened a lot in like 2021 and stuff. But the people that were just pumping these, like a lot of the Cathie Wood stocks, right? These stocks that they don't make money, they're growing revenue, but they're very quickly, but they're not making money, and a lot of these stocks just crashed, and a lot of these guys just pretended like nothing happened. Like these stocks that they couldn't get enough of just went down 80% and never recovered. And they just pretend like nothing happened. So again, I've gone on long enough here. I think I've made my point. So the last thing I'd leave it on here too is I'd love to hear comments, feedback, all that kind of good stuff. And again, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.